Hello everyone, I'm Rebecca Bushby, Director of Strategy and Engagement, and on behalf of Sydney Living Museums, I welcome you here to Museum of Sydney in the Warrain Theatre. I'd like to acknowledge that we're here today on Gadigal land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to everyone connecting in. This is our second Sydney Open panel discussion, Future Sydney. I'm really looking forward to today's program. It's going to be exciting. In these unusual times, our city and the spaces around us have taken on new meanings, and we've seen radical shifts in how we interact with the city and how we interact with each other. Creative thinking in urban planning, in design and in architecture is even more important now. Of course, our program this year is a bit different. We're completely online and we have audio tours downloadable, but you can explore the city, the gardens and homes through the offer that we have online. I'd like to thank our ambassadors, our patron, City of Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore, City Ambassador, City of Sydney Councillor Jess Miller, who's on our panel today, Garden Ambassador Georgina Reid from the Plant Hunter, and our Home Ambassador Aidan Anderson from the local project. Of course, I recognise the support of our extremely important and valuable partners, leading industry partners Built and the Seidler Architecture Foundation, major partner Key Quarter, our media partner Houses Magazine, and of course our presenting partners GML Heritage and BVN. I look forward to a lively discussion today, and I hope you do too. Our panellists will start shortly, and I'd like to hand over to our special guest who's going to moderate today's session, Government Architect Abby Galvin.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us this morning. So I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we have the privilege to be on today, which is Gadigal country. And I actually made my way this morning across the bridge from Camaragal country. And as I did so, I sort of cycled through the beautiful bushy headlands with the twisted red gum trees of the Banda, which are commonly known as the Sydney red gums or Angophora. And I've been trying really hard lately to sort of increase my understanding and knowledge of Indigenous language and using the book called Sydney Language. And I think I'd really encourage everyone to try and do the same, especially when we describe our country, and to listen really carefully when Aboriginal people tell us about how important it is to care for our country. Thank you. So, the future of Sydney. It's certainly a question that's been dominating most of our minds and conversations, and I think that's not just with those who are influencers and kind of builders of our cities, but from the people in the street who are working, living and enjoying or otherwise the cities themselves. It's really well and truly the pressing question of our time. Globally we've gone through this extraordinary and accelerated change. And it's consumed an enormous amount of our lives, and it's sort of and I know that the word is commonly used, but it well and truly is unprecedented. So today we've got a group of people who cover disciplines. We have a builder who thinks we should build less, whose focus is on sustainability. We have our youngest City of Sydney councillor. We have an architect and an innovator. We have a strategist from government whose focus is on shining a light on public space, and we have a world-renowned landscape architect. So I'll just give them an introduction one by one. Jo Carton is the National Sustainability Manager for Built, which is one of Australia's largest private construction companies. Jess Miller has been a City of Sydney councillor since 2016. She's passionate about community resilience, building more livable cities, reducing waste, increasing urban greening, and driving a nighttime economy. Ninochka is a strategic champion of digital innovation and robotics, and an architect and co-CEO of BVN. Caroline Butler-Bowden is the Executive Director of Public Space from the Department of Planning, Industry and the Environment. Caroline leads a team of strategists, policymakers, placemakers and landscape architects, again shining a light on the importance of public space within our city. And Sasha Cohen is the Director of Design and Strategy at Aspect, and he is recognised as one of the top 30 landscape architects working globally. So a huge thank you to the panel for being here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we have. Now, the panellists are all working on really exciting projects and ideas across Sydney and across New South Wales, from enlivening our nighttime economy to housing our innovators, to transforming our city spaces, rethinking the way we see public space, and reducing the energy consumption of our buildings. So the way we'll start is having our 5 panellists take us through projects that really demonstrate how they're influencing our cities.
Start with me?
I think that's a handover to you,
Sure.
Joe.
Okay. Look, I'm really excited to talk about Parramatta Square. Built's been active with our joint venture construction partner, Obayashi, in building some major commercial office towers for Walker. And on the back of 4 Parramatta Square, 3 Parramatta Square, and the win of 6 and 8, we picked up the 5 Parramatta Square library for Parramatta. Now, the way that we won this project, it was a fully sealed, mechanically ventilated building, and as you can see on the image, a beautiful building. But what we thought was that it didn't actually take advantage of the architecture to naturally draw ventilation through the building, via operable louvers. So we found a way by redesigning the system at a tender stage, at a sort of a late stage in design, to incorporate natural ventilation, reducing the energy usage by probably 35%, and also setting that building up for climate resilience. We know temperatures are getting hotter, we know that we're getting less rain, and so that solution actually enables us to get more natural ventilation, rely less on electricity from the grid. The other thing that we did was, by shifting away from chillers and cooling towers, we deleted over 50% of the water use in that building. And pairing that with very low flow fixtures, which we do on most of our jobs, we're able to achieve about an 80% potable water saving in that building. And I think as a 100% electric building, that can be run 100% on renewable electricity, this building that can be run carbon neutral in operation is the absolute future of buildings across Sydney and across Australia, and I think it should just set the benchmark.
Right, thank you.
Wow, I guess the big piece of work that's been going on recently is nighttime, which is obviously huge. The 24-hour economy isn't necessarily the responsibility for any one entity or any part of the community. It's really something that touches everyone. And I suppose the work that I've been really interested in seeing through has been firstly around the late night development control plan. And as a councillor who was really keen to see us reimagine and reinvigorate and breathe a bit of life back into Sydney's 24-hour economy, it took a good year to understand the importance of planning. And once Jess Scully and I really did get our heads around this idea that the DCP, the Development Control Plan, is the thing that tells you what can happen where in a place, we really took it upon ourselves to try and engage the rest of the community with that idea. And what we've seen throughout that process, and it is a process, it's not just something that you kind of, snap your fingers and everything happens overnight, but was really trying to explain to the community and build a level of understanding about what that really meant, and encourage them to not just think about what does nighttime and what do our villages and CBD feel like and what will they be like now, but what will it mean 10, 15, 20 years from now. So a really important part of that was introducing this concept in a way that people could connect with. So we called it the map of fun. And as a consequence, we were able to get more than 10,000 pieces of community engagement and feedback on a planning control, which to the best of my knowledge is completely unprecedented. Usually council planners will receive maybe 300 pieces of feedback on a piece of on a planning change, but what that really did was it build a level of understanding, but it also made it very clear and started a conversation, not just about whether or not, it wasn't about the lockouts, it was about reimagining what the character of not just the CBD could be, but also what the character of the villages would be as we moved forward, and began a broader conversation to say, well, if we are going to let things happen in different places later, what kinds of other measures do we need to take, which, you know, touches everything from retail to sound attenuation to place finding, as well as innovation and thinking about who the people who are going to live in the city of Sydney in 5, 10, 15 years will be, 50 years from now, and what kind of fundamental things we really need to become a global city. So that's sort of something that's been really sort of close to our heart, and something that we're now working in close collaboration with the state government on as we move into summer, and has been really amplified and accelerated through this COVID process as well.
Great, thanks, Jess.
Who doesn't want to be part of the map of fun?
You'd be surprised.
I've done a little bit of a sneaky, I have to say, because I've actually picked 2 projects and put them onto one page.
You're an innovator.
Because in a way these 2 projects sort of represent you know, the things that are happening that are really exciting, I think, in our world. One side is the new headquarters for Atlassian down at Central, which is set to be the world's tallest hybrid timber tower. And I think that's just one part of the project that makes it unique, but the other parts are the integration with an existing heritage building, the kind of prolific landscape through the building and the precinct, which we're working on with Sasha, and the complexity of the build, which we're working on with Built at the moment as the early contractor, and also just the idea about how you create community in a very kind of tall building. And it's a natural and breathing building. So, I mean, all those things kind of make up a huge, maybe reset for what, you know, tall buildings can look like. And it also is aspiring to have 50% less embodied carbon and 100% renewables. And the other one on the right is a different scale, but this is a research project we're doing with UTS, and it explores large-scale 3D printed structures, and with fully recyclable materials that can also be recycled in its own right. So something I'm really interested in is how new technologies and new materials enable us to kind of rethink things and do things differently. And I also just want to acknowledge SHOP, who are our partners on Atlassian, and also Atlassian as well. So it's a very big global team, and working in a pandemic environment, it's been pretty interesting.
Thanks, Manojka. Caroline.
Yeah, look, I selected something from our Public Space Ideas competition, which of course we announced the winner, the lucky winners, and highly commended last Wednesday. And I chose this urban micro meadow in Blacktown, which was one of the winning entries by Cred, because I think it points to the value of great public spaces being local. And of course that's about our health and our well-being. It's about community cohesion, connectivity, the ability for children to play, intergenerational connections. But interestingly, this Public Space Ideas competition was dreamt up about this time last year, well before COVID. And it's been an interesting year, because of course we might have thought that access to public space was a luxury or a nice to have, but I think COVID has shone a spotlight so brightly, a bit like these lights today, on the value of public space as being absolutely essential, I think, to daily life, and that's 365 days of the year. So it was dreamt up at that time, and then I suppose we kind of thought maybe we'd get 100 entries, 150 entries, and we were inundated with about 530, and great to get a big number, but the quality of those entries was extraordinary, from school children right through to industry leaders, you know, and everyone in between. And I think what it talks to is that we are ready to be more creative, to reimagine our streets, our parks, our places, indeed our museums. You know, we're in a museum today. I don't think the rules of engagement have changed. They've changed for us as individuals. We'll never think about our route to work in the same way again, or our local park in the same way again. So that means that the rules of engagement of the city, I think, have changed. And it's up to us as leaders and working with the community to reimagine what that looks like. It's not throwing everything out, obviously, but it's perhaps shining a spotlight on it and the value of it. And the value is social, it's cultural, it's definitely environmental, and boy, it's economic. Great public spaces bring economic value to cities and towns and our suburbs. So, you know, it's been an incredible ride, the competition, and it's been this arc across a year where we have really thought differently about our world. And I think Jess's comment about collaboration and creativity across local and state government is a really a point well made, because I think we've seen an enormous amount of that, and I think that's how we are going to you know, help create that future of Sydney that I think our citizens deserve.
Thanks, Caroline. Fantastic to hear those words from government coming through and showing that leadership, because well, for us, we're very lucky as designers to be involved in a lot of these large projects which are happening around the city. But today I've consciously chosen one of the smallest projects that the office has done, and it's a little retrofit space in the city, a pocket park. Goes by a few names: Napoleon Plaza, 275 Kent Street, Westpac Place, whatever you want to call it. It's a retrofit of an existing little green postage stamp in a very busy part of the city where Wynyard Walk connects through to Barangaroo. The reason that I've chosen it is because, for me, thinking about what the city needs, it's higher quality places, more investment in our public spaces, almost treating them like cultural places like this. That design for, hopefully that's on your screens right now, shows people as the centrepiece of the project. And for us, that's what it's about. It's about a different place to your workplace. That might mean your local park is your new office, or you know, your office is your bedroom, whatever. Things have changed completely. That shows a different work environment, that image there, where we've designed it around people, inviting them, giving the invitation and permission to take their shoes off, sit on the grass, be underneath trees, particularly in this hot climate that we're encountering. So biophilia, planting in the city, greening is important, but also really offering different ways for people to use public spaces. That image shows a high bench, it shows retail, it shows people lounging on the grass, it shows people using public space in a very casual, informal way. And I'd love to see our city embrace more of that.
Great. Thanks, Sasha, and thanks everyone. That was I think an incredibly kind of inspiring and quite diverse range of projects and ideas. So I'm really interested to sort of talk about some of the challenges that we have and some of the opportunities that we have seen as a result of the environment that we are sort of in and have been through. And I thought I'd just start with reading out a number of the headlines from various sort of media articles and the like. If more of us work from home after coronavirus, we'll need to rethink city planning. Goodbye to the crowded office, how coronavirus will change the way we work together. 41% of full-time jobs can be done from home. From garden streets to bike highways, ideas for post-COVID cities. Suburban offices swell as cities rethink city towers. And escape to the country, how COVID is driving an exodus from our cities. So we've all gone through this sort of extraordinary period of, this rapid change and adaptation. And I think once we navigated through that fear and anxiety associated with sort of physical and social isolation, we started to see some amazing things happen. You know, families and sort of household groups were spending more time together. We could see people out walking and cycling and using our streets and suburbs locally in a different way. High streets were changing. Air quality got better. You know, I was cycling right down the centre of George Street and Pitt Street in the middle of the day. It was amazing, and I felt quite safe. And you could see that people had that sort of sense of buoyancy. And at the same time, I think, as you pointed out, Caroline, we started to also realise how critical our public spaces and our green spaces are, and we stopped taking them for granted, because I think there's an enormous amount we do take for granted when something is there. And I think in addition to our public spaces and our green spaces, we also started thinking about the importance of our homes. You know, that light and access to outdoors and good ventilation actually became incredibly important, and space, and how efficiently and effectively things were designed. So rather than something that you sort of wake up in and then head off, you know, our houses and apartments and units, etc., became more important, given that we were so housebound. So, you know, the 30-minute city, the 20-minute city, even the sort of 15-minute city, it's been this sort of aspiration that's almost been the utopia that no one's ever been able to really achieve, which is this sort of ambition to live and work and play in the one neighbourhood. But through this rapid process of change, we've been kind of hurtled into the 15-minute city. And in some instances, it's even sort of smaller than that. And it's almost happened before we were ready for it to happen. And so once we've had some of these wonderful things that have occurred out of it, what we have seen is that it's come at the expense of our city centres. So I suppose my real question is thinking about this hybrid city that ideally, and you know, when you talk to many people, it's like we'll never stay exactly as we are currently during COVID, but it's unlikely that we'll make the level of change back to sort of business as usual. We'll sit in this hybrid way. So is this sort of hub and spoke model of the way we think about our cities something that you know, is dead forever? Like, what do we need to do to try and change that? And Ninochka, I'd be really interested in sort of talking about Atlassian in that context, and sort of navigating this change for a new hybrid way of living and working, where, you know, you're designing an extraordinary environment for the innovators of our city. So how do you navigate that balance?
In terms of how many people come into the office, or
how many people come into the office, and how you make the office something that is interesting and worthwhile to be attending, rather than sort of sitting in the comfort of your own home and not having to get on a bus or a train to come into the city.
Well, I think with Atlassian, it's one of the really fundamental premises of the project was that, you know, they have a really strong kind of social community within their own culture, and as they grow and expand, it's really important that they kind of retain that level of intimacy around the cultural proposition for them. And so the building actually has been designed almost like a series of small spaces that are vertically stacked, and I think that is pretty unique, and it'll be quite defining. So, you know, the building's essentially designed in 4-storey habitats, and each habitat has a park. Each habitat is naturally ventilated, as well as has some mechanical ventilation zones, and they're all incredibly connected to views and to each other, and they've got tactility of materials and things. So there's sort of the structure of the building itself and the kind of the way it's been set up, but there's also the fact that it's, it's obviously in a sort of right on the top of a major transport hub. So getting there is relatively easy, even if you do have to take public transport. But I think it can draw in the city to some extent, and the city can sort of draw from it too. So I think they're all really important things, and that it's not just coming into a hermetically sealed box, but you're actually coming into a place that has, I think it's going to have just an abundance of character and it also reconnects you with nature all the way through the building, which is really important.
So it's that sort of that focus and spotlight that we have on public space and green space and the importance of amenity in our workplace, in our houses. It puts an even greater emphasis on how critical well-designed office environments are.
I think absolutely it does, and that, you know, I think more than ever we've realised how important open space is to us as Australians. I think it's inherent in us anyway, but to some extent, you know, commercialisation of space has sort of forced us to exist in a particular paradigm for a long time, whereas we can actually prove to ourselves that we can stretch ourselves outside of that, and it's, you know, it's completely achievable. And it would be great that a project like Atlassian and all the other little projects around the city start to kind of catalyse that thinking and shift our thinking.
Abby, if I can just add to that, it's the first time now in my career that I've seen so much attention on the public realm, the way the buildings hit the ground and the interface of activation. And the beauty as well of Atlassian is it's centred on Sydney's third square, planned third square, so Circular Quay, Town Hall and Central. And it's this alignment of governments, so state, local governments coming together with a big vision for public space, and Atlassian's right at the centrepiece of that. So not only all those amazing things Ninochka was talking about internally, but there's an incentive to get out into this incredible north-facing open space, natural from the ground up, which I think is really interesting. And there's more conversations around what that is and more deliberation and angst than the buildings. You know, the buildings are going to be amazing. The public space needs much more thought.
And that's the interesting thing, Sasha, because I think we can often get building obsessed when it's actually all the spaces in between buildings that is sometimes where attention needs to be placed. And, you know, we're really focused on walkability and what you can walk to within 10 minutes of your home. That's what we're measuring. But it's wherever I go now, I'm thinking about, you know, what is this like to walk through? Is it windy? Is it, you know, is it likely to be cold? Are there enough activities on that walk? You know, and that's that kind of, you know, sense of kind of place experience. And I think that stitching together of different public spaces and the connections between them. I mean, I began this morning running along the Cooks River, and of course, you know, that's a kind of lifeblood for all the communities within you know, who live in and around there. And I've never seen so many people out and about. Like Sunday mornings used to be still quite quiet, quite early, but so many people, and that's about quality. It's about quality public space. We've actually got loads of public space, you know, 43% of the state, but it's quality.
Yeah, as well as thinking about quality of public space, you've also been doing work that's thinking about the relevance and using it in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the Streets of Shared Spaces program. That we moved pretty fast after COVID. I felt like we were moving slowly, but I look back now and realise that we announced that program on the 8th of May, and I suppose it was, it's a program about how we can use our streets differently and how they're safe and secure, but also vibrant. And it was about walkability. It's also about cycling. It's about us thinking about them differently. Why do we have rules for this and rules for this? Perhaps we can rethink those rules and enable people to treat them differently. And what it taught me, Abby, was that local councils, we were inundated with ideas. I mean, we had 99 councils apply the length and breadth of the state. Some amazing ideas in regional centres and elsewhere. And they had all these ideas ready to go. But because we made a pilot and temporary program, it was something that they were not always able to get funding for. And I think now we're beginning to see the testing of some of those, and some will really work and some might not work. And that's the very nature of them. And we will see how, you know, and then I think sometimes you plant a good idea and you see community kind of using that space differently, and, you know, there's no disasters in that, and there's safety and vibrancy, and people go, oh, I'll never think about that place in the same way as again. So, I mean, our streets are really you know, I mean, parks are really important, libraries are really important, museums are really important, our streets are very important because they are often that connecting place. And they are about place, they're about movement, but they need to be about place too, at the heart of what they are.
So, Jess, you've clearly been working sort of tirelessly in the way you've looked at a creative reinvention of the city and the focus on the nighttime economy and creatives and artists and musicians getting back into the city. But you've also done a huge amount of work in kind of reaching out to the citizens of the city and asking them what they want. And you know, you mentioned that you had, for example, 10,000 submissions in relation to that DCP change, which is extraordinary. So we all sort of come up with great ideas, but what are people telling us that we should be doing? What do people want?
Yeah, I mean it's such an interesting time because it's true to say that almost everyone has a great idea. Like, there are so many great ideas. But the difference between a great idea and something that is actually tangible change is a lot of hard work in between. So implementation, I think, is really necessary. But to do that well, you really have to have some very honest conversations with the people that live within the city, and not just the people who are hyper engaged, as a matter of fact. So on council, you know, there are always a group of highly engaged, very well informed people who will tell you what they think, unsolicited or not. They will tell you what you think, what they think, and that's fantastic. But I think we do also have a responsibility to proactively go and find out what people who might not be in such a often privileged position to do that also think. So,
and what are some of those key messages that you're hearing?
That we're hearing, well, the way that we do it, and we did last year, was through the citizens' jury process, which was really fantastic because it ensured that we had a really broad cross-section of the city represented, and it was a deliberative process that happened over a matter of weeks. And when they came back to us, there are a few really clear things that they said they wanted. They said they wanted more participatory decision-making processes and accountability in the way government make decisions. They want a dialogue. They don't just like this consultation through checkerbox, which is completely fair enough. The idea of a regenerative city came up as something that I was absolutely floored. Like, I love it. I love it. You know, and it emboldened me to really think about, oh my God, can we push these ideas a bit forward? This idea that the city should be something that contributes to our natural systems, to our cultural heritage, to people, and it's not just a place that takes things. They wanted a city that is equitable. That was really loud and clear. We can't possibly, you know, have a city that only wealthy people can afford to live and work in. For it to be vibrant, for projects like Atlassian to work, you know, young people, people from diverse backgrounds need to be able to pay the rent. And so we need to make sure that affordable and social housing is included. So there are a whole range of 7 really key themes that emerge from that process. And what that does is that, I suppose, makes us as city leaders really responsible and accountable to making sure that while we need to remain adaptive with what we do and how we do it, that there has to be some really foundational work. And what's really interesting, and what the things that we're sort of grappling with at the moment, is sort of this dual speed of being reactive and responsive and agile, but then also making sure that these fundamental values are, you know, embedded within the DNA of these decisions, and that people don't lose faith and hope in the process, because there's nothing worse than asking people what they want and then being like, okay, well, great, that's nice, we're just going to do this anyway, because the whole, you know, the confidence and the trust with the community begins to erode.
Yeah. So just following on from the sort of the passion and the interest in a regenerative city that the citizens of the city are telling us is important, and of course, as you know, a series of sort of professionals in the field, we understand the criticality of that. Jo, you know, we know that buildings and construction consume an extraordinary amount of our global carbon emissions, I think the figures are between sort of 35 to 40%.
That's right.
So is pouring money into buildings and infrastructure and construction really the way to be saving our city?
Well, look, I think in terms of driving a new economy on the back of COVID, buildings represent an incredible opportunity. With new buildings, yes, you can build them sustainably, but we know that 99% of buildings are existing. So the big opportunity is asking the question at the start of a project, do you need to build new? Is there a project, is there a site, is there a building that's existing that you can tweak, that you can change, that you can work with to deliver the kind of spaces that we know we need to deliver to actually get people engaging with the city again? There needs to be a level of attraction. You're right, people can get comfortable at home. If they can do their work from home, why wouldn't they? Unless there's a draw card. Streets, public spaces, beautiful buildings that aren't just beautiful but also look after their health and well-being, right? So I think, take Substation 164. It's a built development. We're moving in there. 2 side-by-side 100-year-old warehouse buildings. One's a substation, old electricity substation, and we're building a bubble on top to add a bit more floor area. But we're re-lifing those assets. COVID hit, and there was a quick last-minute design change to make all the operation of the building touch-free. Now, these are the kind of pivots that we can make in the design space to give people a greater level of comfort that their health and well-being will be looked after, and make use of all of that embodied carbon that sits in those existing buildings. Huge opportunity.
So again, in thinking about that sort of idea of repurposing our building stock, because as you said, we've got something like 99% of stock in the city is existing. What sort of opportunities are there? And Nanochka, I know that BVN had looked a number of years ago actually at some really interesting ideas about repurposing old buildings for education, and that sort of solving multiple problems. It's looking at being able to repurpose existing stock and actually try and manage some of the, the education crisis that we have in the provision of sort of new schools and spaces. So is that an idea that, can start to sort of have life again, do you think?
I actually think absolutely. It's really interesting, in fact, because that idea about using existing commercial buildings for schools within the city, we explored that in 2015. And possibly even a little before that. And the way it actually came about was we were doing a project for Ravenswood and MLC schools, and we took the 2 principals around to see some of our workplace projects in the light of come and have a look at workplace, because this is actually where the kids are going to go to when they finish, and so your teaching needs to kind of support this model. And then whilst they were on that tour, Vicky Steer, who was the principal of Ravenswood, said, well, why isn't this a school? This would be fantastic for a school. This is a perfect space for a school. And so it started this, case study for us, which was called the Smart School, but it was really about pop-up schools in existing buildings, and that you could, in fact, just rent space, just like you do an office fit-out, really, and you could transform it into a school environment. And whether it be a sort of a satellite to a kind of a fixed site somewhere else, or whether it be it's a school in its own right. And I think it's interesting to see that now, 6 years on or so, the Department of Education in particular have now got their heads around a vertical school. And so the model of education actually exists to support the idea. At the time it was a little bit ahead of the model of education, but now those 2 things could actually come together. And now with potentially with commercial offices contracting slightly, there could be this sort of lost space that exists, and it would be fantastic to see it being experimented with in new ways. And absolutely agree with Joe, like if we don't need to build new, we shouldn't build new. And it's really that 98, 99% that we've got to target, and we've really got to focus and not lose sight of that.
When you talk about the 24-hour economy, like people don't naturally think of schools, but that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about, and to Joe's point, you know, how do we make what we have work harder so that if school is only going from 9 till 3, then you've got all these other hours of the days to utilise that space.
Yeah.
And then you might go, well, if we're thinking about a 24-hour economy as a kind of system, then why is school starting at 9? Maybe it should start at 10 or 11 or 12.
And
it's
that's
a real opportunity.
That's super interesting, because at the time, one of the key things that kind of meant it didn't get up, the one was the education model. The other one was the building owners couldn't get their heads around the influx of students. And so they were sort of like, well, how are we going to support that in the building systems and everything? But now that we've lived through, or we are living through a pandemic where we're all, you know, people are coming in at staggered times and we've got new ways of controlling entry points and things, it's that whole thing, it kind of goes away. And so yes, you could absolutely expand, you know, the day and the cycle of the day.
It goes to playgrounds and
Totally,
ovals and spaces all, you know, on school campuses.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Department of Education are looking at that and doing quite a bit of work in kind of this idea of shared spaces.
Yeah, well,
'Cause
Surrey
school
Hills
is-
High School is the great example where the agreement is that the council is sort of, you know, when you've got a huge vertical school, then the public realm at Prince Alfred Park then becomes a shared space,
Supports that,
and then the community in turn gets to utilise the building. So it's a really effective way. It's not about design necessarily; it's about governance and collaboration and having those systems in place.
Yeah. And, you know, so often it needs to be that necessity that's actually pushing you to that point. It's, you know, necessity being the mother of invention. And, you know, they're the sorts of ideas that you kind of need to seize the opportunity for in a crisis, just in the way that you've been experimenting, Caroline, with, you know, some of the propositions and programs you're putting forward. I'm thinking about Sydney Dance Company, the Festival of Place, you know, how you use an opportunity that you have to actually experiment and take a bit of risk without people worrying too much about what its long-term impacts are, because, you know, you've got the ability to sort of think short-term, which can then maybe embed itself a bit longer-term.
Yeah, well, I think I always sort of talk to the team about working up both ends of the spectrum. It's the kind of the narrative end and the, you know, encouraging the story of people sharing what matters to them. And it's not just about asking people to share what matters to them in public space, but what do you do with that information? So we've done a huge amount of community engagement throughout COVID, and it's been the evidence base on which we you know, are making decisions. So that is of vital importance, and it told us that people were using their parks much more. They were caring about their local streets. They were concerned when their libraries were closed. You know, that was a really big challenge. We know that with some of the great cultural institutions too. But at the other end, of course, is the systems change. And that's the stuff that is not the glamorous end, but is the most important work that you'll do. So how can we use this period to, this window in a way, to think about what we do and how we plan, design for, manage and activate public space. So you've got to be working all the time at both ends, I think, and obviously Sydney Dance Company was something that we did to kind of celebrate the extraordinary public spaces that we have, from Western Sydney Parklands to Wagga, where I've been for the last couple of days, right through to the Opera House and some of our great landmarks. But it was also about getting that creative economy going, because the conversation was had, and of course those dancers were dancing nowhere for several months, and you know, there were real challenges. So we have to think about kind of, I suppose, I think a lot about the workers and the economy that underpins public space. You know, a huge amount of people work in public space, from waste managers to the incredible horticultural staff at the Botanic Gardens. Yeah, the ibis. The ibis, get the ibis.
Tirelessly.
Yeah, and part of this is, of course, we've got to get the economy moving again, because that is about how we can get that greater investment further. So how can we be creative about that too, I think is, you know, what we're all challenged with.
So I'd like to really encourage people to send questions via the chat, and I can certainly see there's some coming in, so thanks very much, and I'll be going to those really shortly. I've just got one more question. I know I'm hogging it a bit. for Sasha that I'd like to direct. And Sasha, I know you've been doing a lot of work through your practice in relation to, you know, the design of sort of socially inclusive spaces and broadening the remit and the breadth of the city and who uses it. But you've also been doing work as a sort of citizen activist in your local community. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about that and whether you think that's a model for, you know, how we might engage with our built environment in the future?
This is true, yes. In my other life, my Made in Redfern life.
Love it.
I, well, just happened to be wearing it today, but topical. Yeah, look, we live in we're lucky, we've lived in Redfern for 15 years, and we've built an amazing community of all sorts of people, of renters, of homeowners, old, young, gay, straight, black, white. Like, diversity is pretty amazing. And we have a little WhatsApp group that we all use to communicate, and I get my hair cut by a neighbour, someone teaches me guitar, another neighbour, and I help people out wherever I can. But what we've done as well is we live in a very low traffic street. It's very wide, and we thought we would get a petition going and actively promote this kind of ground up urbanism that we've been talking about. Go to council, talk about an idea of change for our street, because a lot of people are not working, so they're at home or working from home, and we're all around the neighbourhood. We have drinks outside on a Sunday afternoon. Why don't we try and shut this street to traffic? And we did approach through, great people like Councillor Jess Miller and Clover, who have this agenda of, liberating road space, street space from cars that just sit there for part-time to really meaningful places for people. And it's a community like ours that could really deal with more space. Inner city, very urban, all the desire to be together. And so we did that. We put a petition together. It went to council. It's been endorsed through traffic and police and the various committees. And we will get a temporary closure of our street. So that's just one thing. It's a small thing, but it's so meaningful.
Yeah, I think it's
me.
a wonderful example. And there are so many studies and so much research that shows the impact that social cohesion actually has on our physical and mental health. So I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, what I might do is sort of address some of the questions that we've got, which are some fantastic ones, and I reckon the first one, Jess, is for you.
Yeah.
So it's how can we make sure creatives aren't shut out of the city, and how can we make sure there are spaces that are actually for non-corporate use?
It's not going to happen by accident, is the reality. I
So
think.
there's that comment about how important planning is again.
Oh, it is. It really is. I mean,
And planning in the sense of the discipline of planning rather than dot points of on a to-do list.
I mean, I'm not from a planning background, and I've just been on this incredible learning curve through council for like the last few years. And, if I were to go back to really study and find out something, it's when you understand planning, it's like playing chess and knowing the rules. You know how to, or who to talk to and what to ask for when generating an outcome. And it really is a rule book. So the people who sit in planning for very good reason, they will sit there and they will consult the rule book and they will make a decision based on what's there. If we don't have statutory instruments in place that say that we must have a target for affordable housing, prioritising people who are creatives, then you can't expect for that to ever happen. In the same way that if you don't put in aspirations and statutory targets for open space, for libraries, for school, for shopping centres, they don't exist. So really the answer to the question is that the only way that we're going to make sure that the city is an equitable place and that creative people can afford to live in the city is to put it in the planning controls.
But Jess, isn't there something around activism though as well? Like you can't wait for the planning controls to happen.
No.
You need to just get a groundswell and stand up.
And part of it, I think, what I've learnt through the late night stuff, which could be applied, equally to streets as shared spaces, to education, to business, whatever, is you've really got to find someone who can help you translate what that means. And so knowing what to ask for is critical. everybody said they wanted a late night. Everybody said, well, actually, first, everybody said they hated the lockouts, right? So then you have to flip that narrative and go, okay, we know what you don't like. What do you want? Where could we find opportunities for more vibrancy? And then you've got to go, okay, well, now we need to know that it's about the late night DCP. What are the barriers to that? And so it becomes, the implementation and the tactics behind a desire, which goes to governance and goes to engagement, is so critically important.
And in relation to how important it is to be mandated, Greenland is actually an excellent example of that with the cultural hub.
Yeah, so this is a new residential tower that's going on the corner of Bathurst and Pitt Street, and as you guys would know,
Brilliant.
The lower part of the building was developed in collaboration with council, and it'll be a new creative hub for the city. So I think it's a really good example of actually, if you can almost incentivize developers to include these things, like you've got to have a public art, or you've got to have public realm, like why not you have to have X amount of allocation to creative uses or something. I mean, it would be something that's affordable. It would be something in a way that you could, I think, flick the switch on reasonably easily, but it has to become almost part of the mandate of when people are looking at the projects, that it just gets built into the model.
Yeah, and I think we have that at the city, and it's happening. So we've been able to build a lot of affordable housing in Green Square. There's a new development on Gibbon Street, Redfern, and that's a result of not only having an aspiration and a target, but also a mechanism through planning contributions to enable that.
But it's also sort of things like studios or little venues and so on, where you get, because I think in a way sometimes I get a bit caught up with things have to always be big to be good, but actually like all those little micro moments that can get sort of peppered out through the city that actually makes it quite rich as well. And if you go to other great cities, they tend to have, I think, probably more of that than what we have. We tend to sort of have a little bit of a big is good approach.
And COVID,
single use is
Single
good.
use.
I think it comes back to that flexibility and stretching, having enough flexibility in what you've got so that you can stretch it to multiple uses. And I think that there has been that blurring and that almost that kind of breaking down of divisions, I think, during COVID, not least of all that blurring of our home life and work life, which has just sort of really changed the way we all personally experience
Carolyn,
the city.
I agree. I think this is like a Trojan horse which has exposed the vulnerabilities of a monoculture, and the city is the best example, which is a monoculture, let's be honest, of, middle, upper class workers, corporates, finance, whatever. It's a certain demographic, a bit of a donut of creativity on the outside, Botanic Gardens, maybe Darling Harbour, whatever your choice is, but the city centre, it's a creative abyss, and I think it's a monocultural issue.
So just in relation to that monocultural issue, we have a question here which is really asking absolutely about that, which is, can we see CBD office towers being rezoned and retrofitted for multi-uses in specifically sort of live-work scenarios? Now, Ninochka, you spoke about one of the challenges of converting office buildings to schools because of the sort of the lifting and the populations. Jo, what are your sort of thoughts from a construction perspective about some of the challenges of saying, here is a building that's purpose-built for work? How do you start to think about that in a different way?
Yeah, it is tricky. It introduces more constraints, absolutely, saying, well, we've got a building that was built for office work, these sort of floors, this sort of amenities, lifts size to accommodate a certain population, and then to shift that to education or residential. We worked on a project called U City in Adelaide, which was a range of uses. It was brilliant. I mean, it had disability accommodation for short-term and long-term. It had independent living units up the top, had 7 levels of commercial office. It had auditorium space, retail space at the bottom. It was truly a mixed-use tower. That was purpose-built, right? But I don't see why you couldn't take something like 20 Martin Place, for example, where they stripped it back, they retained, I think it was 6,000 tons of structural steel They left all of that steel in place and rebuilt it. Was it challenging? Absolutely. 12 months of heavy demolition work, very noisy. Wouldn't have been great for the monoculture working in the city, having their lunch in Martin Place, but it retained a heap of that structural steel. Getting back to the climate proposition, embodied carbon, right? The carbon emissions associated with the materials that go into our buildings, 60 to 70% is in the structure of the building itself. So if we can do something to retain that structure, we can have really big savings. So it's worth the challenge. Yeah.
So Terence has a question, Sasha, which I reckon is a good one for you, of how do you retain the personality of the villages and not sanitise them with sort of formulaic design?
Yeah, look, I think in a way the villages have developed their own character over time, but I think it's a great question. Each village has a different character. It attracts different people from, north side of the harbour to, if the villages even extend over there, to Newtown, to, each one has a particular DNA and we know it. And that goes to its architectural form, and it goes to a whole range of urban issues. It goes to affordability. Particular, affordability issues are pushing more creative places further out of the city, which is a problem, I see. But I think it's about being a little bit, again, ground up and a little looser with our controls, so that not every village needs to be paved in the same treatment. Not every village needs to have the same tree planting. So just having a bit of an attunement to what the environment is in each village, I think it goes from a council level, but it also is about people who are living there to be active and use their voices.
I think it puts it back on the community as well, because, I mean, I think the personality of a place, like, it's always changing. Like, you can't, people do hate change, and then it's sort of this constant tension, but the beauty is in the tension. Like, it's nothing better than having the community, and like, I'll be the first to say, like, if you want to see some change in your community, go and do it. Sometimes it's better to be kind of a little bit willfully ignorant of what the rules are, obviously taking care and being responsible, but if you want to go and do something, do it. And I think often the community don't feel as if they're always invited to play that role. So I'd love to see more people, taking on a custodianship of their streets, and some of the changes that we've done, like, for, street dining, for example, the alfresco sort of changes that we have brought into place for the city and the villages has done that. It's loosened up the amount of permission you have to ask, and because if you have to go and ask 40 people to do something, like put some chairs and tables on the footpath, no one's going to do it. So I think that's a way that you really encourage people to just do it.
So we've got a couple of minutes to go, and I think one final question, and I think both Caroline and Anochka would be interesting for your thoughts on this, is how do we incentivise building owners to change mindsets and governance to encourage flexibility? Do you think that's Caroline controls, or Anochka, do you think that's about focusing on design?
Oh, it's probably both, isn't it?
I was going to say both as well.
And it is also about the culture, and what type of city do we want to produce, and how do we be how do we build on the momentum, I think, that we've got at the moment to think about things differently. So, yeah, I'm not a planner too, Jess. I was interested in your commentary, because it's been like, I've felt like I've been at the bottom of a diving pool, like kind of crazily learning. But in a way, it's really useful, because you ask a lot of questions. Well, why is it like this? Why can't it be different? So for me, it is about, it's a combination of things, because it's never one thing, I think. I mean, cities are complex places. Yeah.
Well, no, I totally agree with that. I think it's just, in a way, like, what we actually need to get to is a more sort of whole systems approach. And so I'm a bit of an advocate for, rather than the design excellence that we have at the moment in the city for competitions and buildings and so on, I'd be super keen for that to become innovation excellence. And so encourage the developers and whoever's involved in these projects to actually think differently in a whole systems way, not just like design solving all the problems, and then somehow waiting for like legislation to deal with it. So I think if we could do that, I think you'd actually see, you'd see a lot of great ideas unearthed actually, and it'd be something we could
and almost
build
at
off with
a
what we've
precinct
got.
level, like if you were saying let's have an innovation systems competition at a precinct level, then all of a sudden you've got utilities, landscape architects, open space owners having to work together.
It's not about these single entities, but it is more broadly placed, and we're seeing that shift. And of course, places can be messy and all sorts of other things too. They don't always have to be, the places that people are drawn to are often, it's quite unexpected, I think, in terms of, and people are just craving something distinctive. And that's how this Sydney CBD will live on, because in time, people will want to come back and see the QVB. They'll want to see the quay, they want to experience all those other parts that they can't have perhaps in their new local.
But I hope the city becomes a place where kids actively hassle their parents to go. There's desire and there's delight and there's joy, and your unexpected things will happen around every corner in the city. And now is like the opportunity. The stuff that you're doing in the city of Sydney in terms of the fun planning.
But we're putting stages, like this summer you'll see stages and there'll be artists, and that's part of it. And we have to entice people back to the city by reimagining.
The city is a playground.
And that's the city and state working together, I think, in pretty imaginative way to be able to underpin those changes in the city. And we're already seeing those, so I think we just need to get people to visit. We're all here today.
I think the Mapper Fund is probably a perfect point to wrap this up, and to thank the panellists enormously for your contribution. I think it's been a great discussion. I do think it's clear we're well and truly at a fork in the road, and we've got this sort of amazing opportunity to refocus and reset and reinvent. And I can see that so many of you are working on that. And Ninochka, to sort of your point about the importance of not so much design excellence but innovation excellence and it being multidisciplinary. I think just from the breadth of conversation we've had across so many different specialties, you can see that level of reinvention and rethinking of our city well and truly needs to be multidisciplinary. It needs to have us all coming together, offering expertise at multiple levels to reimagine. So with that, thank you very much to Joe and Jess and Ninochka and Caroline and Sasha. Thank you.
Abby.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Abby.
Abby. Thanks.